Hello. Hi, folks. Trying to wake you all up on a Friday morning or a Friday afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. I'm Phil Fersht. Thank you for joining me this Friday. This was a fairly last minute thing, so thank you for joining. We've had a very, very busy week with the HFS Summit, and we were actually blessed with Sandeep Dadlani, who was there as well. So Sandeep wanted to follow up and have a nice informal conversation with you all and take your questions as well. So that just is the first one. We're going to do questions on Q&A function. So just type in as we go along, and we'll gladly try and get to as many as we can in the next 45 minutes, hour or so. So thank you very much. So most of you know who I am. I'm Phil Fersht. I'm the founder, CEO of HFS Research. And joining me are two fantastic gentlemen. And I will start with you, Sandeep. Sandeep Dadlani, if you'd like to just tell everyone a little bit about yourself and what you're going to talk about today.
Hi, Phil, and thanks for having me yet again. I enjoyed your conference earlier this week. It was great to get together, and I'm sure many who attended are joining this as well. So I'm Sandeep. I'm between jobs. I just ended my stint at Mars. I was Chief Digital Officer there for the last 5 years, and prior to that, I was with Infosys as president, and then Citibank in investment banking. I start my new gig next week. So I am formally unemployed today and happy to join your show. Today, we're going to talk about some brilliant work which Rohan and I put together. So I'll let Rohan talk about it. Rohan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Great. Thank you, Sandeep. And thank you, Phil, for inviting me to be part of this. My first time participating in something with HFS. I've been looking forward to it. I'm the founder and the CTO of Soroco. We're a technology company based between Boston, London, and Bangalore. I always joke this is my, in some sense, my first real job experience amongst the first rather. I've largely been an academic prior to this. I have a PhD in computer science from Harvard and an undergrad degree in computer science from Cornell. My area of research is largely focused on distributed systems and networking and wireless and so on, but I do something very different now.
Excellent. Good. Well, I'm really glad that we have the one day in Sandeep's life where he's totally unshackled, lid off. We're going to get it all right. So, well, actually, what inspired this conversation? There was an article that Sandeep Rohan wrote in the Harvard Business Review. It was entitled, "How much time and energy do we waste toggling between applications?" And I think everyone saw that, thought, I need to look at this thing. What the hell is this all about? But maybe Rohan, you can start off a little bit with what inspired this piece and, what was it all about?
Sure. Sort of not too distant past, I had an opportunity where I was working with a Fortune 500 customer where we had deployed some of our software, and I was talking to people who were actually using our software. And as I was talking to them, they were showing me how they do their work day to day. And one of the things that really struck me was this person I was talking to was using 22 different applications every day. And by some, thumb rule, was switching between or toggling between these applications about 3,000 times a day or so. That was the back of the envelope calculation. And I was amazed by this degree of having to keep switching or keep toggling. And that eventually just, led me and some of my colleagues to wonder, is there a cost to this? Because in life, right, I mean, outside of the digital realm, if I'm eating or I'm cooking or I'm working, these are actually fairly, when you switch between them, that's, it's quite a heavy context switch. But when you switch between applications, is there a cost to it? Is there even a micro cost? And do they all add up? And so I was thinking about this question, and I've known Sandeep for many years. And the respect I have for Sandeep is, not only is he an important and a thoughtful business leader, he can also engage with, technical folks on topics like technology and data. So I was mentioning this to Sandeep, saying, hey, we're doing this research study based on data and so on, actually in the field. And he got very excited, and we decided we'd collaborate, and he had some insights, I had insights. We decided to put it together and, talk about the cost of toggling.
Fantastic. So, Sandeep, you spent a long time, I think, dealing with age-old applications and processes. And, one of the common themes coming out of the conference this week was some people are still doing things the same way pre-pandemic as they are now. What can change our behavior and our habits, and maybe what are one of the two things that you've learned in the last couple of years that you wanted to share?
Yeah, no. So look, I mean, the last 3 years, and your conference actually underlined something interesting. You called it a mass trauma event. And that struck me because we're still recovering from it. I don't think the mass trauma is gone. And when Rohan started talking about the cost of toggling, I started thinking at home, I sometimes will just talk to my teenage daughter saying, you're wasting too much time on TikTok. You're getting distracted by TikTok. You're losing focus because of TikTok. Now, I mean, big secret, I also like TikTok and I spend a lot of time on TikTok. But then when I started thinking about Rohan's idea around work apps and how much they distract us and why this toggling happens, I look back at all the consulting work I have done with Infosys. I have seen many IT shops. Of course, I've seen Mars. And I realized that we really are not thinking about work apps as distractions. They are distractions, huge distractions. And when Rohan did his research on the amount of distractions, I think, the biggest thing I think, Rohan, you shared with me was this whole idea that it takes 2 seconds to switch. And then people are switching every 11 seconds. So even the switch is practically useless because you're not spending enough time in the next tab. So that really got me thinking about, oh my God, our work apps are a bigger distraction than TikTok. And, in a digital transformation, I spend a lot of energy thinking about the consumer centricity, design thinking, user empathy, and like, how do I digitally understand the consumer? How do I build a longitudinal consumer graph and all that stuff? And again, what Rohan was inspiring me to think about, hey, what about the employee? The employee deserves as much attention as the consumer. I don't know, Rohan, you want to build on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Sandeep said something that's very important, which is, as we are looking through the data and these findings, the thing that struck us was often people don't have a choice in how they work, right? This is mandated, it's top down. But what if that very way that you're forced to work is the source of distraction? Some sense you have no option but to go to work and to get constantly distracted. We're not talking about people who are making a choice to switch to Facebook. All of the analysis, all the data is about between work applications when people are toggling. And that really struck us very hard, saying, hey, we are basically, in some sense, how we're designing mandatory work for people is to distract them every day. That's the first. And the second is, and the point that Sandeep alluded to is, look, you can look at this in one of two ways, right? You can say, okay, there's a cost to it. I'll just eat the cost. And okay, so I may lose some productivity. Heck, I'll throw more people at this and so on. But there's a different way of looking at this. And that is from the point of view of people and from the point of view of empathizing with the experience people have when they work this way. Nobody here wants to do a job where every day, you have to switch your toggle 3,000 times. Heck, we would never accept that from our customers. Why is that okay for our employees? And so when we started thinking from this empathetic point of view, that is from the point of view of the person experiencing this, it starts to actually give you a different picture. This is no longer just about, we'll add on more people. Why does this even happen in the first place, right? So as an example, if you're switching between many different applications, then your data is fragmented. Your application landscape is fragmented. Your process design is stitching through all kinds of different systems that don't talk to each other. And maybe therein lies a lot of the root issues. And you can paper over it and just say, okay, I'll just take the cost. But if you don't get to the root issues, then people will continue to work this way where they're mandatorily distracted when doing work. And it's taxing, it's stressful.
Wow. So, we've traditionally thrown, Rohan, people at the problem. I mean, that was how a lot of the industry grew up around services and support and technology, and now throwing people at the problem is getting a bit harder, right? So how do we get around that mindset shift?
My perspective on this, Phil, is actually with data. I mean, this is just one example of what we're discussing. Let me actually answer this in terms of an analogy. So in the 90s, if you really wanted to understand how you could improve your website so people have a better experience, you had lots of tools and ideas to look at your web server log file and say, hey, how many HTTP requests did I get? In the 2000s, Google came around and said, no, you want to figure out how to make experience better for your people using your website. Just directly see how they're using your website, Google Analytics. In some sense, we're making the same case, except inside the enterprise, right? Whether using any kind of home-built legacy application, whatever else, it doesn't matter. But if you can surface that experience that people have, all of us have in using these different applications or processes or whatever else that we do every day, you take the point of view of users and turn that into data. We think that that is perhaps how you begin to change mindset as to how do you provide a better experience at work. And of course, that's important because ultimately that leads to productivity. So that's why my answer to that is data.
No, and I'll build on that. I mean, in the consumer industries, retail, CPG, etc., I have spent tens of millions of dollars building a consumer data platform to understand how Phil interacts with different websites. Where does your IP address go? How do you go from search in Google to let's say CNN.com to HFS research blog to a Target site to an Amazon site and so on. And I'm really trying to understand you as a human being, as a cohort, as a very, very specific cohort. At the same time, me as a consulting leader or a chief digital officer, when we design our internal apps, I'm like, yeah, get me 5 power users. I'll just have them test the applications and we just roll it out. And what this article and Rohan's research brought to me was this big light bulb moment. I should be treating my employees as empathetically, and I'll say digitally empathetically, as I do with my consumers. Why am I not understanding, empathizing, especially after they've gone through mass trauma? Gosh, if ever there was a time to be digitally empathetic to hundreds of thousands of employees after they've gone through and are still surviving a mass trauma. Gosh, there's a Brit song of the year, 2018. It's one of my favorite songs, Rag and Bones, I'm Only Human. Have you heard? I don't know if you heard that song. One of my favorite.
I love it. It's one of my favorites.
And that song, I'll read from that. And it says, maybe I'm foolish, maybe I'm blind, thinking I can see through this and see what's behind. Got no way to prove it. So maybe I'm blind, but I'm only human after all. And that's the point this work graph is making, that we are dealing with human beings. In my agile sprints, I'm so worried about measuring time to build, time to value, mean deployment rates, all kinds of scrum cycles. And I'm saying, I improved this from 5-week deployments to 4 weeks and 4-day deployments. I'm dealing with human beings where if I just think about designing their work apps and experience slightly better, those other metrics will become meaningless because you're not, toggling between apps. Even today, I'm sure the listeners, I want to ask you, you have VIP names slated in your Outlook box. Your boss, for example, my boss in Mars, he was a VIP. So even if I'm working on Excel, his pop-up comes in, boom, my context changes. And when my context changes, the neuroscience to prove that I'm releasing cortisol, the stress involved, all kinds of crazy things happen. Whether I respond to my boss or not, that pop-up has messed me up. And all we're saying is, can we now think differently about these apps? So a big revelation for me, big, sort of epiphany for me. And I'm really determined to, in future roles, be a little more thoughtful about this, to be honest.
Yeah. So how does this, we've obviously identified the problem, but how does the solution work between, oddly, we need obviously people to provide more of the information of where they toggle all day long, what apps they use, because people are, using personal apps as well as B2B apps and all sorts of things. And then how do we start to make life easier for them? Maybe Rohan, do you want to sort of talk through maybe some experiences where you've started to see some success here?
Yeah, sure. I think the beginning of truth there is along the lines of what Sandeep mentioned, which is typically, there are short-term and medium-term answers. The short-term answers are not very good because there's not much you can really change dramatically in the short term. The medium answers, the vector of any medium-term answers along the lines of what Sandeep said, which is once you start designing systems or you start designing workflows or processes or tasks or whatever else, you keep in mind a critical factor of this is the end experience for users. And again, this is not because of a kumbaya reason, right? If users don't have that positive experience, you have no way of producing good productivity from that team. Or heck, in many cases, people will even leave. And in some cases, we've actually begun to see an increasing awareness, increasing sensitivity, and it's actually even become a point of discussion amongst senior stakeholders at customers and so on. And more generally, right, this then leads to a larger conversation of, okay, so as Sandeep said, we have been setting up, prioritizing based on a set of metrics. Maybe there are another set of metrics that are from the employee point of view that can actually help us design our work better or differently. In the shorter term, there isn't really a great answer, Phil, right? Like there isn't something that overnight, boom, you can make the problem go away. People try, if some of this is automatable, you try and automate some of it. You can spread the pain. You say, why should only 5 users switch 3,000 times a day? If you spread it to 50, maybe you switch far fewer times, and so on. But it is the short term is there are temporary band-aid measures, but it's really the change has to be of the medium term.
Yeah, I mean, I think look at the headlines. Just open any magazine: quiet quitting, future of work, and if you. I don't care which company you're in. I'm sure you're having debates on, 3 days a week in the office, 2 days a week at work. I mean, at home. I have been part of those debates. I have actually emotionally argued both sides of that logic because every time I go to the office, I'm like, wow, what energy. And then, on Fridays, I'd like to sort of try and work from home. Until this piece of research, which made me think, actually, we were thinking about the problem all wrong. This is the wrong problem to solve for. This is not being designed differently. And I think the right problem is how Rohan designed it. Are we thinking about work and the design of work empathetically using this work graph? And if that's the problem, I don't know how, look, there'll be solutions over time and there'll be patchwork solutions over time. But just getting the problem right now is such a huge step for companies. Instead of wasting time thinking about 3 days of work, 3 days of office, 2 days of office, all that, debate, which frankly, 1 year later has gotten us exactly nowhere. Everyone's like in this uncomfortable, I don't know, it's kind of sort of 2 or 3 days a week of office, but I'm not sure where it's going. So how can we define the problem right? How might we empathize more with our workers, understand that they're only human, and digitally and granularly understand their experience, and then start those sprints to make them better and better and better. The starting point, the work graph.
Yeah, no, I think so. And, one of the things that really came out, because we ran this study of 1,800 employees across services companies, so we had something very much in common. And the biggest opportunity created by pandemic was that we could hire people anywhere we wanted, and that was the number one reason everyone gave it. This is just awesome. Doesn't matter where you are anymore. So that means you can't get people back into the office when half the staff are now listed around the world, and unless you've managed to build a whole load of new offices, that ain't going to happen, right? So we've got to accept reality. And we have to make this work digitally for everybody. We can figure out our physical get-togethers and stuff, but if we don't address the digital reality of hybrid work, interconnectedness, smart meetings and conferencing, and smart ways of interacting with each other, and with applications, this isn't hybrid work. This is just work from home with video, right? So got to make that whole work experience transformational. So how is this transformational, Rohan, in terms of the whole experience of, are you going into like an actual new type of browser where things are done for you more? Is it more intuitive? What is transformational about the experience?
You mean in this new way of working, Phil?
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, let me put it this way, right? There are, at least in our organization, I'm quite certain it's true everywhere, there aren't any hallways anymore that you can walk down and say, hey guys, what's going on? Or, organically bump into people and find what problems they're having, because now people are remote, more and more things are digital. You're digitizing documents, there are more applications or whatever else and so on. And in some sense, I actually think this increased digitization is increased problems for people. I don't see that as necessarily a better way of life, because now you're suddenly increasing footprint of everything digital. People still have the same number of hours in the day. Probably now you're expecting more hours in the day because their commute time is cut down, right? And you say, okay, great, now you work 12 hours a day. That's wonderful. And on top of that, you have new versions being released all the time. Your process changes and this changes and that changes. Everything is digital. Now, on top of all that, you still have to deliver well. So if anything, for me, I've learned to appreciate and increase the sense of empathy that I feel for anybody in any industry who has to use a machine, when I say machine, a computer and software to do their work. I don't think we had as much emphasis on this earlier on. And in fact, even for managers, right? I mean, it's harder now because you, again, don't have the hallway to walk down, meet your people and so on. And everything is increasingly more things are digitized. How do you know how your people are feeling? How do you connect with them? Teams or Zoom is not the same thing. I've been going to the office every day in Bangalore for the past week just to meet people. It is a completely different feeling. In fact, we actually have another HBR article we published about in December of 2021 to show in the age of the pandemic, how much do managers think that they understand how their teams get work done versus how much in reality, how much do they really understand? It turns out the gap between, the expectation and reality is about 60%, which is huge. And now the same managers, and it's not because managers are bad or anything, it is just because everything is digital, everything is remote, and you have more complexity of all kinds. So to me, this is a more sort of, it's a more complex experience of doing work, I would argue, than let's say 50 years ago, 40 years ago, for sure. And we still don't know, have all the answers for that.
We still don't have all the answers. Exactly. That seems to be part of the problem, right? Is finding the answers, finding the problems, making things different, and really thinking through, what is going to generate the more enriching experience for everybody. So any final thoughts, before there's some other questions coming in similar topics, but you pitched this startup you're working on, this startup company, Soroco, with some really good people who I happen to know Samson pretty well from the past and some other good people in the business. You guys have put a lot of passion and energy into that. You're backed by yourself and your family as well, Rohan. Can you talk a little bit about that business and where you're hoping to take it?
Sure. At the heart of what we do, Phil, and Sandeep alluded to this earlier on, is what we call as the work graph. And I love analogies and sort of as a way of explaining things. One way to really understand this is, see, for the last 30 or 40 years, we've all understood work from a systems point of view, which is I take my log files, I take, wherever they're available, they're usually not available, or they're available for a few applications in standard format. And I'll use that to diagnose what's wrong with my, setup or company and so on. I'll make it better. That to me is like the 90s approach. It is valuable. I'm not taking any value away from it. It's the 90s approach of how, you looked at web server log files, and hardly any web company today looks at, interactions or work that way. And the other end of the spectrum is to take the point of view of people. And, when I interact with software to do my work, anybody on this call does it. In fact, on this very call, all of us are generating data as we're interacting with software for this call. That in the enterprise largely has been either ignored or not as well understood. So we come at it from the other perspective, that is, look at how do humans and machines interact in the enterprise. We are constantly generating this large digital footprint. It's like dark matter. It's there, and yet you can't see it, but it really explains everything. And so to us, the work graph is a map that explains this sort of the interactions between people and machines, and it's an ordered set of interactions. But a key thing there is to discover patterns of work across a team and not at an individual level. This is not about, just to be sure, right? This isn't like a manufacturing shop floor where like, okay, what is person X doing for so many hours? That's not what we're talking about. Instead, what we're talking about is when you aggregate data to the level of a team, you start to really see patterns emerge. For example, hey, I may have the perfect IT implementation, and yet my people are resolving the same problem 50 different ways. That is the last mile. Why is it 50 different ways? Where do they diverge? Where does the team diverge? What can we do? Is this a training issue, or is this some other kind of an issue? And thus far, we have never really approached work from this perspective. We have taken a more systems view. And so the work graph is the map that we excavate, and then we use that as a basis for changing how people experience work, which then, of course, leads to high productivity. So that's at the very heart of what we do. Or another way that I often think about this is the way to scale empathy in organizations. Because usually when you use the word empathy, right, it's a fairly local phenomenon. It's like, okay, Phil empathizes with me and I empathize with Phil. But what if you wanted to empathize with 500,000 people? The only way you can do that is with data. So it's scalable empathy in that sense. And in some sense, that's our mission.
Excellent, thanks. And I'll pick on some really good questions starting to come in. Old friend Bill Schrank. I hope you're doing well, Bill. I think up in Michigan, right? He's intrigued around this move on the people side. You've talked about Sandeep with the digital transformation journey. And he'd like to sort of hear from you at maybe any aha moments you had with Mars when you were trying out this tool, and maybe some other tools that were similar.
Yeah, no, definitely. So look, Mars is a user of Soroco, there's no question, and other set of tools as well. I think if I zoom out over the 5 years of the transformation across using different tools, I remember, while rolling out even some of the most user-centric applications, I don't think we just do enough in understanding end users. I'll give you an example. Uber, the Uber app that you use, who put the live location link there? I want to congratulate that person. That person is a genius, because when Uber's rolled out, it's a beautiful app. But then when you're trying to call an Uber in the streets of New York, it had a problem, which is it was not able to resolve your location very accurately. So it was standing in the next street and avenue, waiting for you in the previous street and avenue. And then somebody in Uber understood the user, empathized with the user, understood digitally where the user is, and put a live location link in there, which allows the Uber to find you, or for you to find the Uber. Or for that matter, WeChat. Go look at WeChat in China. Why does an entire population be very comfortable doing everything that we do here in America across 150 consumer apps on one app? One app. No context changing. And they're all buried in that app. So the point is, designing apps with more user empathy. I made mistakes and I learned the hard way. There's some big programs I remember that we just said, just get 5 power users and they'll be doing my user testing. Tools like Soroco and other tools will have helped us really get more empathetic at Mars, in my consulting career, and definitely going forward, to understand users, end users, drive that empathy. So Bill, the biggest learnings, the biggest ahas for me is use work graph, use things like that, but eventually let it lead your UC, user centricity, and UX movements. Keep designing apps so that they keep improving the user experience every 5 weeks versus what we used to sort of roll out the app and done, deal with it. Yeah. So that's the other big thing. And then when you're rolling out new apps, don't look at 5 power users. Look at me. I'm 1, and n equals 1 means, I'm human. Design it for me. Design it for Phil. Design it for Rohan. See patterns across how we're working. Improve it all over again, and keep doing that. I wish I could do it all over again, which I can now in my next stint. I would use these learnings, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Excellent. And I love this phrase, digital empathy, with enterprises and with people. What's the best way of communicating with staff to really get them to help with their own experience? Because sometimes people don't even realize how bad their experience is until we've gone through it and shown them what's possible, right?
But it can't be the annual Gallup survey,
Yeah.
because the annual ESAT survey, which comes to you usually before or after the bonus time, depending on when the bonus is good or not. I remember through many employer experiences that that is like a one-time check. But Rohan and I were brainstorming that even at basic airports around the world, you can walk out and normally there are those 2 buttons, the smiley and the frown, and you just push it. It's just so tempting. You want to push one button and say, I'm happy or I'm not happy with that experience. We need to create easy feedback loops, experience loops. And I'm telling you, even with the user centricity movement in Mars, employees are eager to engage. If engaged beautifully, if engaged enthusiastically, everybody wants a dose of energy. Everybody wants to live off each other's energies. So whether it's user centricity clubs, whether it's beautiful UX feedbacks, whether it's simple, at the end of every session, I think Teams actually has a very nice sort of feedback thing in the end of every session saying, are you happy? Are you not happy? Don't ask me to fill up a survey. Come on. How many of us fill up a survey properly? And then in the background, unconsciously, if I'm capturing, I'm going to say it again, the work graph, which is I'm actually capturing your, sentiments, emotions, switching, toggling already and sensing how you feel. That becomes very powerful ways of capturing digital feedback or digital empathy, or actually, I love the word scaled empathy across the org.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, I think every time I log out of Outlook, I get asked to rate the app, and it always says, so sorry you weren't happy with your experience. Look, are you going to do anything about it? Because it just gets worse. Anyway.
Sorry, Phil, may I add something there? I think something hit on something very important, and to something you were saying earlier on, Phil. There's a New York Times article a few weeks ago about, in the pandemic age, there's a rise of these productivity tools that are frankly oppressive, right? Hey, Joe was away from his desk for an hour. What the heck, Joe? Were you in the bathroom for an hour? What's wrong with you, Joe? Right? I mean, this is insane. I mean, this is not the way to be people friendly, because you're never getting to the root or to the cause, or you're not trying to understand what's happening to people. You're just trying to say, no, whatever you're doing, I'm just going to force it down your throat and audit you for every minute of your life. I think those are terrible, terrible ways of trying to take people along, particularly, now that work patterns have changed. And that is why, right, as you view things from the perspective of people, it is so important to say, look, the charter is not to identify an individual, not to penalize or even reward in reverse, to begin with, because if you can reward, you can also penalize an individual. It has, all of these things have to be about finding patterns that are common across anonymized individuals, across teams. That is really important, because if you want to take people along, you want people to participate enthusiastically, you can't violate their privacy. You can't be auditing every second of their day. You can't turn them into lab rats. That's not going to work, right? And that's certainly not something people voluntarily sign up for. It has to be something where people feel like, yes, all of us benefit, all of us want to be part of this. I think that's a very important invariant, according to me, in this journey.
Good.
Yeah, there are days when I sleep well and I have good coffee, and I'm a rock star for the first hour, and I can get more done in that first hour in 5 days. And the other days, I just don't feel like it, and then all day I'm struggling. And we all are like that, and that's all we're trying to say. It's so different. It wasn't always that machine productivity mindset.
I've learned to, if I'm finding I'm not focused in the day and you're just wasting time staring at a laptop screen, take a break, for a couple of hours. Go for a walk. Do so, because three focused hours is amazing. If you can get really zoned in, you can get so much done. And the key is to know how to manage yourself a little bit and not just tie yourself to an application or a suite of applications to the point where you're just using busy time. Because, you know, we've all got staff and friends who are on 18 hours a day, probably producing less and less actual quality work because they're burning out, not thinking about how they're managing time and focus and things like that. So having the ability to understand people's work habits and help them think through change and focus and stuff is really important. I spend a lot of time with the people I manage, just, you know, say, hey, this is what works for me. What works for you? Because this is what the new mentoring is all about. It's helping people be more productive and smart about how they're working, and because otherwise you end up with this people just complaining about how busy they are all the time. You know, how you can't get anything done. I'm like, this is crazy. So I have a great question that's come for you, Sandeep. It's a more of an off-topic question, but it was this somebody I think who used to work with you at Infosys wanted to know why you chose to not work for another tech-focused provider. You went to Mars for quite some time. What was the inspiration behind going to a CPG company and not a tech company?
Actually, I wasn't thinking, so thank you for that question and indulging me. So I wasn't thinking about whether I'm going to a CPG company or what industry. I just fell in love with Mars's purpose. Mars is a company which has a very visionary family founders, board, and leadership team that runs it. And they are determined to create a better world tomorrow. And they were serious about investing in a digital transformation. They were serious of going 100x. My favorite sort of logo for Mars is digital transformation. And I really thought, changing context, bringing back to this topic, changing context from the tech services world to this kind of a large global $45 billion, 150,000 people matrix organization will help me now build new muscle, grow, learn, and hopefully drive impact. Look, you and I are all trying to drive impact in our respective roles. So that's why I switched. It happened to be CPG. And frankly, the next industry I'm going to is different from CPG. So what I've now found after looking back, of course, is that I'm enjoying changing context once every several years, 5, 10, 15, from Citibank, investment banking, to Infosys, tech services, to CPG, and now a different industry going next. And everything I expected from Mars, I think the experience was even better, much better. I learned a heck of a lot. And along with a fantastic team and a leadership that was very visionary, hopefully we could drive some impact and drive what we can call some sort of a digital transformation. So what's my advice to you? You didn't ask this, but I'm going to tell you anyways. Don't be afraid of changing context every once in several years. Be very afraid if you're changing context every 11 seconds, which is what Rohan is saying. Don't change context every 11 seconds. But every 5 years, every 10 years, every 15 years, it's okay to change context, because then you blank again, you panic, you're scared, and you learn and you grow the most in those changes. So that would be my advice.
Amazing, fantastic. And wherever you are next, I'm looking forward to your announcement. I think a big continuation of these themes is going to be very exciting for us all to learn as you continue. And I think people very much appreciate you engaging a lot with the outside community that you built before you joined Mars, as well as what you're doing at Mars. And I think one of the things I enjoyed as an analyst, we would talk with the Mars team a lot, and we got to know all sorts of folks in there who were very proud of the work they were doing, especially as the pandemic cut deep and the businesses like pet care at Mars suffered because of over demand, and how they leveraged automation and AI to actually have immediate impact on customer facing front office capability, and getting away from this mindset of how do we just rationalize cost in the back office. So that was very, interesting and exciting. And what I love to hear more about, and maybe Rohan, you can share some of this from your customer interactions, is getting people into the mindset of exploring exciting technology that can really help them. I know so many people, they just use like anything Microsoft or anything Oracle. They're not thinking about what can I actually inspire me to do things differently out of the box, not just follow green lights and loggings of events and things to be inspired. I mean, what's been your experience of getting customers to find the time to really try out exciting new tools?
So two sets of things, Phil. You know, as I joke that in our company that I'm a freshman, because I say, hey, I was in academia, and I just as it's my, I joined and I'm learning with everybody else. I learned to do sales, I learned legal, I learned a bunch of these different things. And in that sense, my perspective tends to be perhaps a little different. So the first thing I've kind of I've seen is anytime and I'm able to, in front of a customer, I'm able to say something to them that challenges a deeply held belief, at least then they're willing to engage. Whether they're willing to try or not is a secondary question, they're willing to engage. If I'm able to say to them, hey, look, how you work is a data problem. It's not a consulting problem, right? People usually say, wait, what? How is that a data problem? I hire consultants all the time. They, like Sandeep's in his previous avatar, right? And so on. And so that I've usually found, I almost always say, when there's a young company that's attempting to create value and say something new to companies, like Mars or other companies are hearing a gazillion ideas every day. It's almost like the formation of a religion, because every new religion by definition has to say something different or new from all existing religions, or otherwise you don't need to exist. And just like every new religion has gone through, the first set of apostles go through some pain, torment, persecution. Of course, I say this jokingly, right? But you need to go through, it's a conversion process. And so really the deep sort of the deeper insight there is being able to say something to people that's of value to them, that challenges some long-held belief. At least I'm able to get a second conversation from that. Having said that, I actually want to say a little bit about how I found end users. That means, most of us who run things on our system in enterprise, I spend a lot of time with them. And I have this framework, and I'm not even sure if this framework is complete, but nonetheless, I'll share it. I think in the piece of software or the kinds of innovation that tend to do well with these end users is, with all of us rather, is it has to check at least two dimensions out of these four. One is joy, second is loneliness. Every human being feels loneliness to a certain point. Third is vanity, and fourth is fear. Now, of course, if you build a software product or a proposition that only taps into fear, I don't know if it's a great idea. But something like LinkedIn, perhaps on which we're all on, probably taps into vanity, maybe a sense of loneliness too. Maybe something like Teams or Zoom tap into joy with a sense of loneliness, etc., and so on. So whenever I find pieces of software that people use in enterprise, I keep wondering which one of these boxes do they tick? Because if you tick at least two of these four boxes, I find people are willing to try. If you tick none, then this has no value to anybody. Then it's just an inert piece of software or an inert idea. So I kind of have these frameworks somewhere in mind.
I love that. I can imagine a lot of work apps driven purely out of fear. I mean, you're muscling with them. You're just trying to get transactions done because there's a fear factor in them. No, and look, I've known Rohan for over 15 years, and I call him a benevolent insurgent because he's trying to change the world. Yeah, and he probably will. But there's a benevolence around it in terms of driving that insurgency. I think Bruce Springsteen once said, "You can't start a fire without a spark." Dancing in the Dark lyrics again. I think Rohan's that spark here. He's really trying to start a fire, around the work graph and everything else that he does. And for people who are set in their ways, large organizations that are set in their ways, you have to find change leaders who are willing to then take that spark and light a fire. come on, it's a short life. Let's do something.
I've got this song going in my head now. So,
Courtney Cox down.
yeah, I got this questions come in. I actually think it's really interesting from Raja Chowdhury, and it's like, can work graphs address something like quiet quitting with people, or helping employers understand who's actually engaged, who isn't in the business, because that's sensitive, but incredibly important as well for certain businesses.
It is, Phil, but I mean, I have to think through that a little bit more carefully. But my instinct is, as of now, if you have to identify the person, then don't even go near it, even if it is for a good purpose. Because as soon as you do that, for sure, the same thing will turn into some other negative purpose down the line. But the problem that Raja mentions is an important one. I don't deny the importance of the problem. It's just that my current bias is towards, good or bad, don't identify any person.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. But I think what I understand of quiet quitting and firing, look, the one biggest factor you solve for there is leadership. No tech in the world, no data in the world, no app in the world can solve for a great leader. Once you have a great leader, that's 80% of the problem of all this quiet quitting, firing, etc. Empathy is first a human quality. It'll become a digital empathy, it'll become scaled empathy. But if the source of empathy is not right, then quiet quitting, firing can't be solved. Now, once you have a great leader, of course, a great leader's job, I think somebody else talked about servant leadership, is to create beautiful experiences for her team, for his team. And that's when the work graph, digital empathy, scaled empathy, it is to scale the empathy of the leader. So quiet quitting, firing, first leadership, and then use all digital tools to scale.
Yeah, I know, I'm with you, but I mean, I've seen situations where leaders are trying really hard to be empathetic and talk to their staff and understand, are you unhappy and bored, and the staff respond that everything's great, then all of a sudden, boom, quit, gone. And that wasn't the leader's fault. They were trying hard to, every day they were worried this person's going to leave, but they were convincing them, no. And these were some Gen Zs. I don't want to stereotype here, and then all of a sudden, up, leave, gone, out the door. And these people were left stunned. And having more information and data on how engaged those employees were, because in hindsight, you look back and find out those people weren't particularly engaged because they weren't actually responding to customers and internal staff and things, is you need that data, you need that insight to support great leadership decisions. And I think it's a combination. So
no, I feel that's a really good point. And I think that can be done even at an aggregated team level, right? But it'll take time. So there is an opportunity to build models where you can say, hey, looks like a certain team has high attrition, but what are the characteristics of this team? And there are some characteristics that are about the digital experience and some are not, like, salary and this and that and so on. And then there are other things like, okay, this team is paying a high toggling tax or whatever. This team is doing highly repetitive work, or this team, you can characterize all of these things with data, for example, from the work graph and so on. And if you can build a model, and you can probably correlate some of these things over time. Some approach like this, along the lines of what you're saying, is plausible.
Yeah, I think though that there needs to be, it's fixed management, fixed leadership, drive engagement, drive empathy, drive all these things, but then having good data to support that has to be in the thinking here, because if it's just taking, when you're working in remote situations, people want to feel trusted, people want to feel that they're given more freedom to be creative, and we all like that. But then when people take advantage of that situation, that is a thing that is becoming a major problem. When I talk to employers, they all have the same problem, and I don't think it's always the employer's fault. They want to figure this out, they want to help, and I think they need better tech, better data to help them figure this out.
So I'd say if Raja or anybody in this call wants to build that amazing company on top of the work graph data, we'll absolutely support them. And I mean, seriously, because that's part of our vision too. Because this data, who knows in what insane ways you can actually change the world with it, right? We've just never looked at the data this way. And so we always think of, hey, there'll be a future where one day people will sit on top of this data and build highly successful use cases in companies of stuff that we did not even imagine. So that's an open invitation.
In fact, in the consumer industry, there's such a big science around cost of acquiring a consumer and the lifetime value of a consumer. I wish you flip that. The cost of acquiring or retaining an employee and the lifetime value of an employee. That would just change the entire mindset of how we think about employee data, right? Because consumer data, employee data, we get drawn into thirst traps to putting our email in because that company wants to get to know you. Why aren't we trying to get to know the employee?
Exactly. I keep saying the billions and billions of dollars we spent on CX tech has to be reinvested in EX tech to understand people better, because we don't spend that money. And I've worked with some of the biggest companies in the world who've done massive movements of employees between divisions, layoffs based on Teams data of interaction. That's all they've got to go on, is how engaged these people were with using Microsoft Teams. I mean, that is terrible, right? How do we get better understanding of people and sentiment? And as you said, cost of employee over time and this sort of stuff. This is new. This is hitting. So this is fascinating conversation. And one of the things that came out at the conference was that companies like Microsoft and Google and lots of the big tech are investing very heavily in India, for example, now. And some of the Indian providers who were there were actually very bullish about this, because this is creating a new work culture and a more choice for India tech talent, for example, where you can go work direct for Microsoft or go work for Infi or Accenture, whoever, right? And I think it brings in new work cultures and habits as well, which can change the industry. So
I really love this, what Sandeep and you said, Phil, which is as much as we invest to learn about customers, how do we invest in the same way to learn about employees and people and care for them in the same way? That to me is a very powerful idea or theme.
Yeah. Hey, well, look, this has been fantastic. I've really enjoyed a Friday conversation over coffee and just a bit of fun. And there's a nice, engaged bunch of you on the line. I'll leave you with one of the songs that Sandeep was raving about earlier, because I happen to love it too. And we'll do something like this very soon again. But Sandeep, great to spend the time with you on a Friday. I look forward to your new career move announcement when that comes pretty soon. I'm sure it's going to be very exciting, and a lot of people are riveted to know what that's going to be. And Rohan, great getting to know you a bit. I see you're in London. I'll be in London soon as well, so I might hunt you down for lunch or something. So
no, wonderful, Phil. I look forward to meeting you in person. I've been reading your articles for ages now, and so it's really nice to get a chance to meet you. I love your fiery spirit. I absolutely I can relate to it. And thank you for this time and this opportunity, and great to talk to you and Sandeep, and to meet Mark as well.
Fantastic.
Happy weekend, everybody. Keep listening.
Weekend. Cheers.
Maybe I'm foolish, maybe I'm blind, thinking I can see through this and see what's behind. Got no way to prove it, so maybe I'm lying. But I'm only human after all. I'm only human after all. Don't put your blame on me. Don't put your blame on me. Take a look in the mirror, what do you see?